Hey there everyone, I'm here today to give a YouTube-ish version of the talk I gave at the Anderson Public Library on October 19th, 2022 titled 3D Printing for Cosplay. Of course, this will be a little different than the live talk where I had actual props and examples, but you should still get a good idea of what was presented to the decent-sized group in attendance. Now before we go in, let's talk about who I am. My name is Tony Troxel. I have been a prop and costume replicator since 1992. I am a former Hollywood effects artist. I have worked on the Tick television series starring Patrick Warburton. I have worked on Blade 2, and I've done a little bit of work on Stephen King's Dreamcatcher. I am a former licensed prop builder. I have built Battlestar Galactica blasters back in 2000 for Guardian Entertainment. I spent some time with Lucas Francis Studios making Terminator 2 endoskeletons, Terminator 2 those broken arms that were in the glass tube, and alien xenomorph heads from the original Alien. I am one of the founding members of the Rebel Legion. And of course, the icing on the cake of any cosplayer's resume, I came in second place at the Fry's Electronics Halloween Costume Contest in 2006. So, why am I making them? Why are you watching this video? Well, what we're here today is to talk about the different ways you can use 3D printing for cosplay. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because even with that resume, I'd like to remind everyone that I am just a hobbyist. I have been messing around with 3D printing since, before the pandemic started. So we're talking 2018, 2019. And I am by no means an expert, but I've been figuring out some different ways to use this to help with my costuming and prop making. And there are probably other ways to do it. You can do a ton of YouTube searches and find a ton of different people with opinions out there. These are just mine and what I know. So first off, you can use the 3D prints as on or actually as your costume. That's the way most people think about it. You can use 3D prints to prototype pieces for your costume, and you can also use them as mold masters, and we'll talk about what that is towards the end of this talk. First thing I want to talk about is back in September, I did a talk for the Anderson Public Library that was before this one that was meant to roll into this, and it was called 3D Printing for the Hobbyist. I'm not going to do a review on that, so this video isn't 40 minutes long. But if you're interested in that, the link to this video is on this channel, and the link will also be in the description down below if you'd like to check it out. Now, actually talking about 3D printing for cosplay. The first method I was talking about was using your prints to make up part or most of your costume. And these I slip these down into 3 columns, even though there's a lot of overlap in these. And the first way to do this is using it as the base of your costume, commonly done with armor costumes. This is where when somebody looks at you, all they're really noticing is the stuff that you 3D printed, the stuff you made. So this is very common with Star Wars armor. Think characters like Mandalorian characters, shore troopers, stormtroopers. If you're not making them out of vacuum formed plastic and you're wanting to make them out of 3D prints, this is what I'm talking about. Iron Man and War Machine are very, very popular 3D printed armor costumes. And with the recent release of Wakanda Forever, Ironheart is also becoming a very popular 3D printed costume. Now, there's also using it kind of as the focal point of your costume. It's a large piece that's rather essential for recognizing the costume. Something like the proton pack from Ghostbusters. If you're not wearing the pack, people might recognize that you're a Ghostbusters cosplayer, if they see the name badge and the no ghost patch. Otherwise, you're somebody walking around in a tan flight suit. And this will is part of the things I say will overlap with the next column, but something like the phased pulse rifle from the Mandalorian. You're going to be recognizable if you're dressing as Mando. That shiny Beskar look is very, very distinctive. But kind of the icing on the cake there would be if you were able to carry that tuning fork and rifle, because while it's large and it's unwieldy, it's such a cool prop and it's really essential for really recognizing, at least in my mind, essential for recognizing that character. And there's also a large piece that some people like to make, the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII. If you're doing a cloud cosplay, that is, once again, almost essential. And finally, we're talking about the little pieces, using something as an accessory or an embellishment for your costume. So we're talking about the items like a communicator for a Star Trek costume, and that could be either the chest comm badge or the cell phone flip open Scotty beam me up sort of communicator. A very specific example is like what I've done for my resistance pilot costume, and I'll throw some photos in right here, where most of the costume is um, cloth, but a few of the items that are kind of really essential for knowing what it is, the leg flares or the chest box or the blaster, all those pieces are 3D printed. And then finally, we're talking about some lightweight hand props. And once again, I'll try throwing a couple of photos in here. The example that I have is and I'll have a picture of it on the next slide, the phaser from Star Trek First Contact. I received one of these from a friend back in the early 2000s, and I received a resin cast that supposedly was cast off the screen used piece. I say supposedly because while I do trust this friend very much, it has been 20 years, so the memory's kind of rough. I just want to put that caveat out there. I also have a 3D printed version of this phaser, and the weight difference is astounding. Now, of course, the resin one is completely solid resin, where the 3D printed one is, about 15% infill made out of a lighter plastic. But still, if I'm walking around with one of those essentially with a holster velcroed to the side of a cloth costume, I definitely would rather carry around the 3D printed one than the resin printed one. And you'll be, like I said, the photos show both of them on a scale and what that weight difference is. Now, to go into a little bit more detail here, like the first column mentioned, pretty much as the main part of your costume, and that's very, very much used as for suits of armor. Couple examples here. This one is a gentleman that goes by the handle Frankly Built. He is on YouTube. He is on Instagram. Look down in the description. I'll have links to his stuff. Check him out. He is great. This is his Iron Man Mark 85 suit. And if you look at this, you don't see any cloth. This is all 3D printed pieces that you're looking at with lights. It's shiny, it's smooth. He just does a fantastic job. Now, to kind of show you how you would get your prints, this is a snip of one of the images from Mystery Makers. I am a member of their Patreon. They also do some stuff on Etsy. And once again, links will be down in the description. And this is his suit of heavy infantry Mandalorian armor. And so this is everything that needs to be 3D printed for this costume. And that's about 70 to 80% of what you need. And it's everything from the armor to the helmet to the jetpack to the, you know, BFG that he carries. And then to show more of a finished version of a Mandalorian armor, we have Vault Fox, which is another fantastic cosplayer. I'll have links to her material in the description down below. But this is her Bo-Katan. And once again, everything is 3D printed, the helmet, the blasters, the armor. And you can tell there's a flight suit under there. There's a leather blaster belt, but what you're really focusing on are those 3D printed pieces. And that, I mean, if you're not wearing those pieces, you don't have the costume. So these are what I'm talking about when it's like the essential, the major part of your costume. Next up, we have the pieces that are the focal point. The pieces that you still have a costume, but people can really tell who you are when you're wearing these pieces. Items like the Proton Pack from Ghostbusters. This is one I'm currently making. It is the 1984 pack. It's made out of FDM filament printing. I've been printing this mostly on a CR6 SE from Creality. But it also is going to have, and in this picture it does have, a couple of actual pieces that were the same types that were used on the original packs. The next item we have up for bid, no, this is not actually for sale. We have the phased pulse rifle from the Mandalorian. This is another kit that I'm working on, downloaded off of um, begins with an M. I keep thinking Mystery Makers. That's not it. My Mini Factory. And this is once again printed off of filament with a little bit of resin. A lot of the detail pieces, the smaller bits, are resin printed instead of filament. And there's when it's put together, it will also involve some PVC pipe for the barrel and a small carbon fiber tube for the rod under the barrel. But once again, a Mandalorian is definitely, you will definitely know who he is when you see him walking around even without this rifle. It's just when he's got that rifle, it makes it look so much, in my opinion, makes it look so much better. And then, something that wasn't mentioned on the initial list, but we have here is a Robotech helmet, Rick Hunter's helmet from the Robotech series. And sure, if you're walking around in that costume with the helmet without the helmet, if you know what the series is, you're going to know who that is. But if you've got the helmet on, that's just the icing on the cake. And once again, this is another one that's completely 3D printed. It was printed on, I think this is printed on my CR10 Smart, and it's all filament. But definitely something where the costume would be recognizable, but it's so much more recognizable when you add this piece to it. And finally, we have the little bits, the pieces like the hand props and the accessories. So we're talking about things like the DH-17 blaster pistol used by the Rebel Fleet Troopers in Star Wars: A New Hope. This one right here is made out of filament and resin. There's a small acrylic rod right there inside the scope. Right there, that's where the acrylic rod is. And if you're walking around as a Rebel Fleet Trooper, first off, there's not a ton of people who are going to know who you are. But if you're walking around in that blue shirt, black vest, long white helmet, most people that are familiar with Star Wars are going to know what character you are, even without the blaster pistol. However, if you have the opportunity to use that pistol as one of your props, have it in your holster, use it as your, getting photo ops going up against stormtroopers, it just makes the suit look so much better. Another piece, and this is something we talked about earlier, I showed some pictures of this on a scale. We've got a Type 2 phaser from Star Trek The Next Generation, or in this case, Star Trek First Contact, completely printed out of a filament. And the grip was painted using a black plastidip, so it has real grip feel to it. And then otherwise, it's automotive paints. So but that is completely 3D printed. And if you're walking around in a Star Trek costume, people are going to know it's Star Trek. But it's one of those little pieces that really help add to it. Those pilot leg flares from Star Wars The Last Jedi. I showed some pictures of this stuff earlier that, I mean, yeah, you can get these where they're made out of metal, but they're on your leg. They're going to be heavy. You can get these that are made out of resin. It's going to be the same issue. They're on your leg and they're kind of heavy. These are printed FDM. Once again, they're filament and they're on your lower leg. So if you don't do a ton of finishing work and there's still a couple of layer lines on them, it's not that big of a deal, especially on the part that's covered over by the strap. And the great thing is, you print these, you hit them with a heavy coat of filler primer, you paint them metallic, you put them in the leg flare holder, and if something breaks, you print another one and you do it again. It's not like if you lose one of the flares from a $75 metal set. So that is, just another great way to use little 3D printed parts to help accessorize your costume. And finally, just because I like showing this off, say you're a huge fan of the Disney film The Black Hole. And I know most of you are going, what? But this is a laser pistol used by the Sentry robots in The Black Hole. And say you're small enough that you want to do one of those Sentry robots. Think, somebody has to be small enough to do a C-3PO costume, aka not me. And say you want to do one of those costumes, here's one of the hand props you can use that really helps make it look better. Or if you're doing one of the Palomino crew members that are escaping at the very end and you need one of these to show, to help accessorize that costume. There you go. And once again, it's fairly lightweight. It make it look pretty decent. It's completely printed out of filament. And this one I will admit is a little rough, but it's one of my first 3D printed props I built. So I'm just happy about it. So I try to throw it in wherever I can. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is using your prints to prototype pieces of your costume. Um, Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about where you're not actually using the piece for the costume. You're not making a mold of the piece for your costume. You're using it to help figure out your costume. So, specifically, what I mean is say you have the idea for a costume or a prop. When I first got into this almost 30 years ago, you would have to get a ton of reference material, and then you would either start buying model kits and taking bits from those kits and kit bashing them together to make what you're looking for, or you would have to um, go in and sculpt what you're looking at and make sure you got your rulers, you got your tape measures, making sure everything's right there. And then you would have to then make the mold of it and then cast it and then probably clean that casting up, make another mold, and so on and so forth. Now what you're able to do is you're able to use a 3D modeling program like, say, Fusion 360. You use that, it's got measurements already built into it. You start putting everything together. I will tell you, there are a couple of fantastic um, training courses on how to use this by both I Like to Make Stuff and Punished Props, and I will have links to those in the comments. Not affiliated with them at all. I have just have both those courses, and they have been teaching me a lot. I need to sit down and pay some more attention to them, get them completed, so I can start doing this stuff myself. But they are very, very accessible. Help explain stuff very well. But you can use a program like that to really get your piece, what's in your head actually on your computer, and then you just, you know, get it on your 3D printer, print it out, and then what's been in your head is now in your hand, and you can go from there with it. And if there's something a little off, you just go in, tweak the file, print another copy, tweak the file, print another copy, do what you can to recycle that plastic, and you're good to go. Now, the very specific example for this I've got, and this is something I am actually working on right now, is the Proton Pack from the 2016 Ghostbusters Answer the Call. And my wife saw the movie and really liked those packs, really liked those costumes. I mean, she's like me. She grew up with the 84 Ghostbusters, enjoyed it, but not something she really wanted. She saw these and it was now something that she liked and she wanted. So I've started looking into making one of those for her. And there's not much information about the pack out there, especially when you compare it to the ones from Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, or even Ghostbusters Afterlife. And so, I mean, you can go digging through some Facebook groups, but for the most part, it's not great. However, if you dig around sites like Thingiverse, you are able to find a pretty rough 3D model. And here's what that model looks like. And you know what? It's a little rough, but it shows you what the pack looks like. Everything here is pretty much the right scale. And so what I'm doing is I have printed out all these parts. And so I now have a better idea of the scale of everything because like I said, while it's a bit rough, they did a good job of making sure everything's sized fairly accurately. So now I'm able to use these pieces so I can track down things that were real world bits that were used on this pack. I can use these to get measurements to scratch build some pieces. I can even try to clean up some of the pieces I printed to use on the pack. So because of this, I was able to take a model from online, print it all out, and now I have a reference to use, an actual, not just photos with rulers or anything like that, but an actual in my hand tactile reference to be able to help replicate this prop, and it's making my life so much easier. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is using your prints as a mold master. Now, why would you want to make a mold of your prints? If you're not familiar, let's back up a little bit. Using them as a mold master means you take the print, you clean it up, you make a mold out of it, out of silicone or whatever, and then you use that mold to make the piece out of a material you're more familiar with, something like a resin or a fiberglass or even metal. Now, why would you make a mold? Well, to quote a fellow prop and costume maker that I've known for a number of years, quote, I'm really not sure how 3D prints will behave under stress, so I'm always a fan of molding them and then casting in materials that I'm familiar with and understand their strengths and limitations. So what this means is many people want a piece that they don't have to worry about warping in a hot car, like armor printed out of filament, or that will easily shatter because the resin was too brittle because the 3D printing resin used was just an incredibly brittle resin. So that's why you'd want to go ahead and make a mold and make it fresh casting out of your print. Now the steps you would take, and this is from the same friend I got the quote from. He made this. He has this replica of Jay Garrick's belt buckle from the Flash TV series. So what he did is he took this 3D print, cleaned it up as nice as possible, got it the texture he wanted it to be, made it as smooth as he wanted it to be. Because otherwise, you make a mold of it, the silicone's going to pick all of that up. So you want to make sure your mold master is very clean and just the way you need it to be. So once it was cleaned, he made a quick mold. Just kind of pressed the piece down in clay, put little divots in for registration marks, surrounded it with a foam core box. Once that was all sealed up, he poured some silicone in. Once the silicone was set, he tore the box apart, cleaned the clay off, removed the and took the clay off, kind of flipped it over, poured the other half of the mold, and then when that's done, he will then have a mold that he can cast the buckle out of a resin or something like that. All right, so with that, we've pretty much wrapped up our presentation. So to review, we have talked about how to use the actual 3D print as part of your costume, either as a majority of it, a focal point, or just a little add-on. We have talked about how to use printing to help prototype your costume or your prop. And we've talked about how you can mold the 3D print to make something just a little bit sturdier. Now with that, that is the presentation I gave at the Anderson Public Library about 3D printing for cosplay. If you'd like to find more information about me, if you want to follow my stuff, you can find me on Instagram at Geek Building. We can find me on Facebook under Geek Building. And there's my email if you want to spam me, and I'll just ignore it. I do want to say thank you if you stuck around this long. I do appreciate it. If you'd like to keep up with my monthly videos, feel free to subscribe, and if you found any value in this, please give me a like. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Offer expires November 28th, 2024. As I go, though, I'd like to remind you all, please, the world sucks out there. Try not to make it suck even more. In fact, if you can, try to make it suck just a little bit less. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you next month.